Good afternoon, dear students. This is your Sudha Mam. Welcome to the second session of lesson 12, that is reproduction in plants. In our previous session, we have studied about introduction to sexual reproduction in plants, under which we have studied about parts of a flower, complete and incomplete flowers, unisexual and bisexual flowers, pollination and agents of pollination. And in this session, we are going to study about fertilization in plants and some modes of asexual reproduction. Let's enter into our today's topic. Fertilization. As we already studied that transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of a flower is known as pollination. That means the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to stigma. It is of two types, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. And already we have studied that wind, water, insects and some animals act as the agents of pollination. And once the pollen grains deposited on the stigma, there are some substances present on the stigma which promote the germination of the pollen grain. Because of this pollination, once the pollen grain is deposited on the stigma, then some substances which are present on the stigma stimulates the germination of pollen grain, so that the pollen grain germinate and forms a pollen tube. A tubular structure arises from the pollen grain, what we call it as pollen tube. And this tube ultimately reaches the ovary through the style with the male part. It contains male part. Already we know that pollen grains contain male part or male gamete, and along with the male gamete, this pollen tube reaches the ovary through the style of the flower. And this male part fuses with the female part of the ovule of the ovary. So, inside the ovary, ovules are present, and this male part fuses with the female part in the ovule. And fusion of the male and female parts is called zygote, and the resultant cell is called formed due to the fusion of male and female parts or gametes is called zygote. And this process is called fertilization. The process of or the union of male and female gametes is called fertilization, and due to the fertilization, zygote is formed. And after the fertilization, the ovary develop into a fruit, and ovules which are present inside the ovary develop into seeds. And these seeds further produce new plants. Already we know that the new plants arise from the seeds, and the seeds thus formed are dispersed to different places by the agents like wind, water, birds and animals, including human beings. We are all act like the agents for the dispersal of seeds. Dispersal of seeds, that means movement of seed from place to place, is called dispersal of seeds, because if all seeds germinate in the same place, they will compete for water, nutrients, soil, space, etc. So, that is why they have to move from one place to another place, so that they will get all these resources, so that they will grow into a healthy ones. If all are grown in the same place, then they will compete for the resources with the mother plant or among themselves. And these seeds grow into new plants under the favorable conditions like air, water and warmth. Warmth means correct temperature, not high temperature or not low temperature. Then we will call it as warmth. So, if air, water, warmth are available to the seeds, then they germinate and they grow into new plants. And the production of baby plants or offsprings from the zygote is called sexual reproduction. So, the production of new plants from the zygote is called sexual reproduction. So this is all about sexual reproduction. Now moving on to the asexual reproduction. The formation of new plants without sexual reproduction is called asexual reproduction. That means in the asexual reproduction, a single parent is sufficient to produce its own kind or its baby. Whereas in sexual reproduction, as we have seen, two are required where the male and female plants or organisms are required. So, there are many types of asexual means of reproduction is there, out of which we are learning few types, that is, one is budding, second one is spore formation, and third one is vegetative reproduction. Let's study about budding. Example, yeast. Yeast is a unicellular fungus and it grows with the help of a small bulb-like outgrowth which increases in size and breaks off from the parent plant to live independently. And this process of reproduction is called budding. So, in the yeast cell, a small bud is formed on the parent's body or parent cell. And the bud then continues to grow until it separates from the parent cell. And this process is called budding. And another organism, Hydra, also reproduce through this method, that is budding. Then moving on to the spore formation. Take a blood slice and cover it with a box or with a vessel and leave it undisturbed for 2 or 3 days. So, take a blood slice and put it in a box and leave it undisturbed for 2 or 3 days. And after 2-3 days, if you watch, it is completely covered with a grey colored fungus called bread mold. So, what is this fungus? Bread mold. And the whole growth appears like a black powder like matter or greyish matter or black powder like matter. And if you observe this powder under the microscope, it appears like the given figure. So, it contains the stalk-like structures and a bulb-like structure that is called sporangium, and that stalk is called sporangiophore, and inside the sporangium there are spores are there, and these spores under favorable conditions they germinate and grow into new plants. And moving on to the vegetative reproduction. Already we know the vegetative parts, that is root, stem and leaf are called vegetative parts of the plants. In some plants, seeds are absent. Some plants they do not produce seeds. And how such plants gives rise to the new plants? So, the new plants grow from the any part of the parent plant, like any vegetative part of the parent plant, like root, stem and leaf, and such type of reproduction is called vegetative reproduction. And vegetative reproduction by roots, that means the new plants grow from the modified roots. Example, sweet potato, dahlia, carrot, beetroot, radish, etc. In these plants, the modified roots they produce the new plants. And vegetative reproduction by stem. The new plants grow from the stems, that is potato. Example is potato. In the potato, from the eyes means some depression like structure we can see on the potato tuber, what we call it as eye, and from these eyes the new plants arise. Potato is a stem, children, though it is growing underground, but it is a stem. And even in onion and corn, also corn means kanda, and even in these two also the new plants grow from the bulbs and corms. And The new plants in sugarcane also grow from the stem cutting. And here the stem cutting contain buds, and from these buds the new plant arises. And even in mint, that is pudina, and even strawberry, they also the new plants produced in these plants also, the new plants produced from the stems also. The stem which is creeping on the ground, at their nodes they develop some new roots, and later these are acting like a individual plants. This is all about vegetative reproduction by stem and vegetative reproduction by leaf. That means the new plants grow from the buds on the leaf. That means these plants, they produce the new plants from their leaves. Example, bryophyllum and begonia. This is all about the asexual reproduction. And let's recapitulate the reproduction once. The process in which the organisms produce their own kind is called reproduction. And reproduction is of two types, that is sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, the male part and the female part unite and forms the zygote. Zygote develop into seed, and from the seeds we get the new plants. Whereas in asexual reproduction, we have studied about budding in yeast and spore formation in bread molds and vegetative reproduction. And vegetative reproduction through root, stem and leaf. And dahlia, carrot, beetroot, radish are the examples of root, and sugar cane, onion, potato are the examples of stems, and bryophyllum and begonia are the examples of leaf. So this is all about reproduction. And let's summarize today's topics. Today we have studied about fertilization in plants and asexual reproduction in plants. That's all for today. Meet you in the next session. Thank you.